If you were going to buy an interface on looks alone, I think this would be your huckleberry. This is the Under Armour, no wait, United Airlines? Nah, that doesn't sound right. University of Alberta? Oh, Universal Audio. This is the Volt 276. Nailed that intro. By the way, this was sent to me by UA for the purposes of this review, but I'm not keeping it. I love the aesthetic. The lights on this thing, very tasteful. Absolutely nothing feels cheap. The inputs are good. The knobs, good as well. And if you're buying this, here's what you can expect. It has two inputs. The phantom power serves both of those inputs, by the way. And this phantom power is actually kind of cool. When you trigger it on or off, it actually mutes the channel and it slowly ramps up or down. And you can see that by the blinking light. So no more popping when you turn it on or off, which is a really nice feature that I think should be done more with interfaces like this. You have an instrument selector here and a headphone out on the front. On top, you have your gain knobs and monitor out knobs, as well as a selector knob for your headphones, which allows you to cycle between stereo or mono output. You also have your meters up here. They're not the most granular, but they're a whole bunch better than a lot of other interfaces. And over here, you have the special sauce for those interfaces. You have the vintage selector and the classic 1176 compression, which is kind of what UA has been hanging their hat on for some time now. Now, we'll go over what those sound like in a bit. On the back, you have 2 1/4-inch balanced outs, MIDI in and out, a power input for when the bus doesn't have enough, and an on and off switch, which is actually kind of a nice feature. This thing is USB 2.0 Type-C. It's 24-bit, 192 kilohertz, and it works with Mac, Windows, and iOS. No word whether or not it works with Android. And that's all I could really find listed online. But if you're wanting all those juicy specs, I do know Julian Krause has a great breakdown of them all, based on his own testing. By the way, for this video, I've been running with the vintage and compressor off, but let's change that now, shall we? This is with the vintage selector off. And we're going to turn that on. Now you're going to notice a bit of a shelf in the higher end when I talk. It just adds a boost in that airy section of the frequency response. And this is what it sounds like. Once again, this is with it off, and this is with it on. So there are 3 different types of compression on this interface, but the only thing separating them is the attack and release on that compression. The vocal has a fast attack and a slow release. The guitar setting has a slow attack and a quick release, and the fast has, well, a very fast attack and a medium release. Let's go through them right now. Now, as I move over to the vocal compression, I do actually have to gain it down a little bit because it does actually add gain to it. This is the vocal compression with it on, and this is with the vocal compression off. Now let's take a look at the SM7B. Right now I have the compression and the vintage on because the vintage actually adds a nice little boost to the SM7B on the high end. With the compression on and the vintage on, I'm sitting at about just before 3 o'clock on the gain dial. And this is the output. My output is peaking at about -18, which is perfect for me. You can get this up higher. And let's do a little bit of a preamp test here. I'm going to gain this up and we'll see exactly how much of that preamp noise you can hear. First though, I'm going to turn off the compressor for that. Now I'm peaking at about -12 and I'm not even at full preamp usage here. So let's gain it all the way up and find out. Considering that's not too bad. And also the idea that you can drive an SM7B without much post is quite nice with this thing. So now with the compressor engaged, let's gain up to see how much noise is kind of being cycled into that with the compression on. Now you will notice there is more noise with the compressor that also has the vintage attached to it. You'll also notice that this microphone is very usable without any kind of inline preamp with the Volt 276. That's impressive. Okay, so there's tons of pros here. It's a beautiful and quiet interface. Easily drives an SM7B. The vintage, it's a nice little add-on. And the compression is a big bonus. There is a bunch of functionality in this thing, and it comes with some of the more interesting plugins. As for the cons though, it is kind of cost prohibitive at $300. I mean, it is really nice, and the compression and vintage settings are awesome. But you can easily pick those up as plugins, and if you don't need those features in line, $300 might be hard to swallow. And the big problem is in that $200 to $300 price range, there really isn't much separating the crowd. The inclusion of quiet pre's is expected. The ability to push an SM7B is becoming more and more expected. So it can come down to some very specific things like the included software, or even the air button on the Scarlett versus the vintage button on here. There's not much else to say. If this thing is in your price range, well, it's hard not to recommend. It's kind of funny too, because at this point, aesthetic is actually becoming part of the conversation. And for a few $100, you can actually pick up something that matches, well, your own setup. I guess it is kind of becoming more of an important factor for some, and that's cool. Let me know down below what you think about the Volt 276 and whether or not you think it's a deal for its price. Hit me up down below. Cheers, and I will see you in the next video.